make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, never been banned from Facebook or YouTube, never been sabotaged or censored for politely expressing a difference of opinion, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Hello and welcome to episode 36. Today I have Mike Stuchbery here with me, the badass historian who gave Paul Joseph Watson of InfoWars a total factual smackdown on Twitter. Being owned on Twitter is the new counterculture, I guess. Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me, how did that all happen?
Well, for the longest time, I've had a deep and abiding loathing of Paul Joseph Watson. I've been waiting.
Why? He's such a nice guy.
He's a lovely character. No. I've just been watching his ascent through the alt-right sort of media sphere, and this time, I've been always looking for things to trip him up on because I just hate everything he stands for, and this was it. This was something I knew something about. So I went for it. I wasn't going to throw away my shot for this one. So and then obviously it blew up in various circles.
Yeah. So can you just explain for the audience what had happened, what he had tweeted? And
a couple of weeks ago, the BBC released a video, part of a series called The Story of Britain. And in this video, it showed everyday life during the Roman occupation of Britain. And so the BBC produced a video for kids, part of the series The Story of Britain. And in this episode, they depicted a Roman family at the time of Hadrian's Wall, and the father was black. And Paul Joseph Watson lost his, can I swear here?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, well, he lost his shit. So basically, he was like, can't remember his exact words, but it was like, oh, yeah, that's really accurate, isn't it? Basically, I said, look, here's where you're wrong. And I sort of tweeted a whole bunch of examples regarding skeletons with North African and African descent that they found in York and in Gloucester and in London, and just basically sort of, giving him a bit of an idea of the fact that Roman Britain or Britannia was a very vibrant, diverse place that had people from all over, because that's just the way the Roman Empire works. Mm-hmm. And finished with a bit of a get fucked and blew up from there. That
was really quite beautiful how you ended that.
Yes.
Yeah, and you got J.K. Rowling tweeting.
Well, J.K. Rowling, she picked it up, and then I went from 6,000 followers to I think I'm on 30 at the moment. So it was literally an overnight thing. Just people sort of liked what I was doing, and I think it was really telling and really heartwarming that there's a whole bunch of people out there who care about history and basically telling it as it was, as the factual record shows. And the factual record shows that it was an incredibly, at least in Britannia, in the first, second, and third centuries, it wasn't just, white Celts. There was people from all over. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something really important going forward in history education. If you look at the span of British history, which is, where I'm teaching, where I was teaching and where I'm sort of doing my work now, there's continuously been a multicultural presence. It's not a monoculture.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that these alt-right types react so aggressively to mentions of diversity and things?
Well, I think it's part of their arsenal, sort of talking about, this is what we've achieved, this is what we've done. There's a whole bunch of really sort of odious types on Twitter and Facebook that get really into this whole sort of identitarian thing, sort of peddling their I've been talking to a lot of people about this recently, using things like the Crusades and the Templars and the Roman Empire as kind of touchstones for, what we used to be, but now we're failed, and, we need to bring those days back, and this is what we were.
Yeah.
we had our bastions of whiteness and, you know, bullshit. The historical record shows it's bullshit. So,
and have you seen any of their videos where they like get these DNA tests to prove just how white they are, and then sometimes they're disappointed with their DNA results?
I haven't seen that. I'd love to see them though. I'd probably will look some up afterwards because I like that kind of Schadenfreude.
Yeah, so I've been like watching the alt-right pretty carefully as well. I mean, I'm in a strange position myself because I'm like of Muslim background, and you know, I'm happy to criticize things from my culture and, you know, help push things forward. Like I'm an advocate for LGBT rights and sexuality and things like that, like, you know, free expressions of sexuality and women's rights in Muslim communities. I myself, you know, have left the faith, but you know, most of the people I care about in the world, my family, my parents, you know, are all Muslim. So I don't come at it from this place of hatred of Muslims, and I'm seeing a lot of that now, and it's really hard to kind of criticize your culture in a fair way in this environment, like, you know.
Yeah, because, you know, if you start, you know, I would suggest that maybe if you start doing that, you start to pick up on the attention of these individuals, and it can get really ugly. Yeah,
exactly. How do you protect yourself from your voice being hijacked by, like, you know, the Trump fans and things like that?
That's the thing that these guys, I think, are the best at is sort of co-opting any voice that they can find. I mean, I've always thought that these guys are like, you know, the best grifters. They're really good at sort of taking any opportunity to hijack somebody else's voice. And, you know, I mean, I think a lot of these guys are in it to make a buck. I'm not sure that all of these guys are 100% on the level with, you know, they're hate peddlers, but I don't know whether 100% of them are actually behind what they say. But I do know this. I know they're excellent. They're excellent at hijacking, at taking bits from any community that sort of speaks up and says something about their own community. And, it's ugly. It's very ugly.
Yeah, and then they end up silencing like discussions as well, which they don't realize, I don't think. By hijacking people's voices, they're just making people uncomfortable to speak. And they've taken my work, like, you know, my artwork or my articles, and published them in full without, you know, even ones that I've said, this is not for you, anti-immigrants. Like, I start off with that, and they still today have no problem using it. So it's very.
They have the massive entitlement.
Yeah, so it was, for me, very good to see someone like you calling PJW out, and a lot of people responding, because sometimes if you lose hope in humanity in this political climate, right? Like,
well, I mean, you know, I had to sort of, I mean, that did cross my mind when I was saying it. I mean, like, I'd had some conversations with friends of you know, various faiths and colors about, you know, how do you stick it to the alt-right and stuff like that. And, you know, you basically hear it from a lot of my friends was, you know, you're a straight white male. You can say this shit. You can get away with it. So I think that was, I mean, I think that's terrible. I think that's terrible that that's the case, that, you know, people are frightened of speaking up. But, you know, when I sort of watch these guys do their thing, like, I don't really sort of, it's hard for me morally, I guess, to say I'll just keep quiet on this one. You know, I sort of feel like, you know, I'm in a position where, for, you know, due to my privilege, I will be listened to. So I just thought I'd take it. You know, I feel like I should take it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just so glad that people have responded so well to it, and that Paul Joseph Watson was upset enough to make a video about it.
Yeah,
about how he wasn't owned by you.
I can tell he was quite angry, but
he looked like he had been crying.
He did look like he'd been crying. But this is the really interesting thing, though, was that Mary Beard, who the professor of classics at Cambridge,
I
probably one of the greatest experts on in the Roman world. Not that these guys would basically know much of her work. Weighed in and sort of said, "Yeah, no, this is accurate." And, you know, looking at the sort of blowback to me as, you know, just a normal guy, and her as comparing the blowback that I got from the alt-right to what she's getting at the moment, it's astonishing, the vitriol that she's sort of picking up, which is, I think it's very telling. It's a pretty sad indictment on on public debate, at least here in the UK.
And just generally, like on the internet, right? I mean, being a woman on the internet, you always get double the hate.
Yeah.
And Yeah, that shouldn't be controversial to say, but I mean, some people would probably find that controversial.
In of itself, yeah.
But what do you mean women get more hate? Yeah. No, what do you think of this new Google manifesto thing?
Oh, garbage. I mean, I think the interesting thing about this Google diversity memo and a lot of the stuff that happened after I was saying that talking about the Romans and saying that these guys were coming from North Africa was that suddenly everybody is a racial or evolutionary or biological scientist. Everybody thinks that they're an expert. So I think one of the things was that Jennifer Raff, who's a DNA researcher, actually weighed in and was sort of explaining to these guys that they were all saying that Northern Africa, there were no black people in North Africa before the Moors invaded in whatever it was in the 7th century, and she sort of waded in and said, that's absolute garbage. This is what we know and this is what we've found. And, they said they wouldn't listen. They would sort of cling to these sources. And when you look, when you actually go down the rabbit hole with some of these sources that the guys use and some of the stuff that was used in the Google memo, mm-hmm. it's thoroughly debunked stuff. It's stuff from the 30s. It's I don't want to say it's like Nuremberg race stuff, but it's close.
And it doesn't help the case of the guy that he's going on these strange, like either alt-right or alt-right associated YouTube channels to give his first interviews. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with this gem of a guy called Stéphane Molyneux.
Odious man.
Yeah, blames all the world's evil on women.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the guy, I guess it is pretty telling that that's the first place that he goes because, I mean...
not exactly the best place to go if you want to prove you're not a sexist.
I think if he was trying to be fair and rational, that's not the first place to go. But when these things happen, I think you do have a lot of people in your ear trying to whisper, saying you should do this, you should do that.
Yeah.
I guess, maybe he was already a fan of Stéphane, so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It could be that he doesn't know enough and then he got caught up and swept up in this stuff. Either way, I think it's just...
Well, I think that's another thing about these, a lot of these alt-right guys is they've got some great production values. I mean, they don't look too half bad. So you've got in many ways, many people are thinking that this is the new media. So
yeah, but if you just Google or just look up Stéphane Molyneux's channel, it's unhinged. Like it's like the death of Europe and the death of Sweden and the death of Canada and immigration is bad and women are cocking men. I don't know, just ridiculous shit like that. Should give you a clue.
Yeah, but maybe he's just clueless. But overall, I mean, I think it's absolutely bloody ridiculous that you can get to the stage where you're working for Google. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. I've known some dudes in software, and they can be a little odd, but you get to the stage where you're working in Google, where you've got past their rigorous, employment screening and testing, and to still come out with ideas like that. I mean, I know obviously it's an ideas factory, and you're encouraged to throw whatever you are thinking into the ring, but I don't know, just sort of shows a lack of judgment and emotional intelligence, and lack of reading as well. I think because I think if he'd done a bit more reading, he'd understand that what he was trying to say was people have discounted it or debunked it or disproved it a long time ago.
Yeah, well, it just strikes me, it's funny that a lot of these people that are completely outraged beyond belief, they're calling, they've changed the Google logo to Gulag, and, they call for the death of New York Times.
A lot of I think one of the driving factors there is that Google's cutting down on. I think they've changing their algorithms, so it sort of detects that you are likely to be a hate speech kind of channel, or being offensive in some way. I mean, Paul Joseph Watson's going nuts over this at the moment because his videos are likely to be demonetized. Well, I think they're already demonetized, but his channel will be shut down. So I think for a lot of these guys who are making a buck out off making videos, this is just a good excuse to get stuck into Google as well.
Yeah. They're going after like YouTube, but the thing is, they're the ones that talk often about the marketplace of ideas, or
it's like that cartoon where you've got the guy trying to choose between two buttons. It's like, one button's labeled Google is stifling free speech, and the other button says a company should be able to hire and fire who it likes.
Exactly, right? So on the one hand, they argue that, if you can't get a baker to bake a cake for your gay wedding, then you should go and find another baker. And on the other hand, or they even probably celebrated like Kathy Griffin getting fired for holding that head of Trump and things like that.
But the whole thing is no offense. The whole thing is like, you're offended. Okay, deal with it.
Isn't that what they tell the left all the time?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it's all very confused. They aren't even ideologically consistent, it seems.
No, and that's what goes back to my point before. I think a lot of these guys, it's essentially a money-making exercise. What I'm like, I've said this in a couple of, I've been asked to comment on it a couple of times this week, and I've said, and I say it over and over again, a lot of these guys, these stars in the alt-right sphere, I don't think they're 100% behind it, but the money is too good, and there's a few real unhinged ones. I think Stefan Molyneux is probably one of the more unhinged ones.
Yeah.
But you pull Joseph Watson's, and certainly Milo, from what I know of him, they're there to get a reaction and to make some money off that reaction. I really don't think that they've got their hearts 100% behind it. What I'm scared of, and what really is, I think, was driving what I said to Paul was the fact that he has a huge audience of people who are, still in school, young people, and they listen to his words. And then I worked as a teacher for a long time in Luton, which is a heavily Muslim area, and it's fantastic. I love living here, and that's part of the reason. But you've got these couple of kids in the class who are watching these videos, and usually it's not the Muslim majority in the classroom, but it's a kid listening to Paul Joseph Watson talking about the Islamification of Britain and all this kind of stuff. And we've had a couple of terrorist attacks in the last year by complete loons, and when I was teaching, it was particularly like very touchy. How in handling that, and obviously a lot of the kids were quite traumatized by it. But there are kids who start responding to that by picking up on the talking points of these old right guys, and Absolutely. It's word for word, it's verbatim, the kinds of messages, and it's kind of hard as a teacher to sort of sit down with the kid and say, hey, look, this is bullshit. Like, you can't say that, but you know what I mean. Like, it's hard to sort of talk a kid out of it. Because it's I feel it's a teacher's job to sort of make sure kids are not getting into what would be called radical agendas. Yeah. And I do think that the alt-right can be fairly radical in some of the messages that they promote. But, it's a very tricky situation.
To know that you as a teacher can spot that and try to, I don't know.
Well, combat in the UK, we're actually trained to. We have to. We go under. We've got something called Prevent here, which is spotting radicalisation to any degree, sort of any ideological path, like radical Islam. I mean, that was the big thing when it came out. Everybody was sort of talking about how far do you go with that? Like, we've got a lot of faith schools here, so what does that mean? So, but also, I mean, increasingly people are saying, okay, look for the guys who are listening to these crazy dudes on the internet and talking about race wars and stuff like that. There's a lot of people, like there's quite a few figures online that like Baked Alaska and things like that are straight up Nazi, but they're kind of sort of, and I guess Richard Spencer as well, but they've almost got a professional sheen to them, or like a sort of cuddly sheen.
I don't know if you've kind of delved into the sort of more intellectual, pseudo-intellectual sort of professor kind of those people, but being part of like the atheist community, you see how many people are like 1 degree of separation away from some of these really disturbing alt-right and white genocide type of people. And they do come with this sort of pretend intellectual sheen to them, and they are university professors, and
they can cite studies, and they can
manipulate information.
Yes, and they can, their rhetoric is on point. I mean, they can be extremely persuasive. That's also a point for me, which I sort of have been mulling over at least in the last 2 weeks. Back to the Roman thing. I mean, obviously Mary Beard got up on the parapet and said, okay, this was accurate. There are a lot of historians who are starting to do this, that are increasingly, I've heard from them, they've spoken to me, they've said, look, we're getting really terrified about these guys hijacking our agenda, and these guys can actually argue. So, what do we do? How do we handle this? I mean, obviously historians and medievalists and others in the sort of, the history sphere are starting to work out how to organize and sort of counter this, because there are a lot of very persuasive people.
Mm-hmm. And well, that's good to hear that someone's trying to organize around countering this, because
it's interesting, because the first time I saw this was there's a Tumblr, Medieval People of Color, and that got a lot of attention when it came out, and 90% of it was from these are academics putting this stuff together and putting it online, and 90% of the reaction was the right wing, who were absolutely going bananas at the fact that they'd found some records of a couple of Moors in 13th century Bohemia, and like, I think that's what set me down on this path, like, sort of saying, I want to find someone and wreck their shit when they start talking alt-right bollocks, or trying to use history as a weapon.
Mm-hmm. Well, because, I think that's a great path, to be honest, so thank you for that. And hopefully, you'll have many more viral Smackdowns and go after more and more of them.
Well, I think the thing is that what I hope comes out of this is that, I'm yeah, sure, smacking down somebody is fun, but what I'd like to think is that a lot of people have come to me and just sort of said, how do I learn more about history? How do I learn to spot this kind of, how do I learn to spot when I'm having some sort of racist bullshit fed to me? And I mean, I'm quite overwhelmed by it. I'm sort of like, I'm just a guy, but here's some books that I've read that sort of helped me on my way. And I think that's something I'd like to do a bit more work on. I'd like to think that the work going forward, the good that would come out of this is helping people spot fake history, because, fake news, that's flavor of the month. But, fake history is a bit harder to spot.
Yeah.
Someone's peddling it, especially some of these academic types, as you've said.
Yeah, and I don't know, do you know Lauren Southern?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you're familiar with all these lovely Canadians.
Yeah.
I thought you were such nice people.
I know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening, but rebel media has not been good for us. But they kind of, the Lauren Southern types, they peddle this, this great replacement, and it gets, some of the talking points get picked up by people who are considered more credible intellectuals, like I guess Douglas Murray. I don't know if he's not picking it up from Lauren, but he also has some overlaps in talking points about liking or agreeing with how Enoch Powell's speeches were spot on, or even underestimated the problems, and things like how immigration is destroying Europe and Muslims are chasing Jews out of different cities, and it's all frightening to me as an immigrant to hear this stuff.
The thing that I find quite funny about a lot of this stuff is when I talk to a lot of, obviously through all of this I've been exposed to a lot of American alt-right fanboys, I guess you'd call them, or goblins, or the hordes, and the single talking point every time that they come to me is like, mind your own business. Or actually, this is before this happened, a lot of it was when I'd sort of comment on American politics, they'd say, mind your own business. Look what's happening in your country. Your country is falling to terrorism. People are, you're not safe. It's not safe to go out on the street. It's, coming out with this list of stuff that obviously picked up from not only the really crazy, the alt-right stars, but Fox News and stuff. And I think I actually got to the point where I was walking down the street in London because I work in central London, and they were saying this, and I sort of took the camera out and started taking a video for them. Look at this hell. Look, nobody's getting along. Some things are on fire. I'm actually having to do Sharia law right now. But it's the difference between the image that is presented and the reality of European migration, I think, is astonishing.
Yeah.
The British response to radical Islam as well. I mean, if you listen to Fox or a lot of these figures, you'd say that it was not safe to leave the house, especially for me, living in Luton, which is one of the biggest migration hotspots in the country. But
isn't
really,
that where Tommy Robinson's from?
Yeah, it's where he's from. A prick. But it's probably the most welcoming and accepting place I've ever lived. And the general response to the to terrorist attacks over the last couple of months has not been one of hatred and ostracizing neighbours. Yeah, sure, there's been. I'm not going to deny there's been hate crimes and things like that. But the general mood is, these guys don't represent the whole. They are outliers. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with the recruiters and the radical, basically the radicals who are recruiting people, not just the. How do we sort of separate and identify them ahead of time? It's not a society that's turning in on itself and tearing itself apart. That's what I'm trying to say, which is incredibly heartening.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it doesn't help that the Western right, but is becoming more and more radicalized as well. In order to combat Islamic radicalization or Islamism, having this polarized politics is really the worst thing that can happen, where all moderate and nuanced voices are drowned out on either side, and only extremes are battling each other, and the hate grows, and it's this cycle. And if there's a lot more anti-Muslim bigotry, perhaps there will be more Muslim bigotry, and then the cycle of hate just continues.
Well, it's like what they say about they want the stated aim of Islamic State is to eliminate the grey zone. They don't want to have a space where people of all colours and faiths can be. They want to they want to alienate the Christian West from the Muslim East and sort of return it to a sort of clash of civilizations. And I mean, luckily over here, I mean, I don't see that gaining the sort of attention and the sort of recognition that they want. I mean, I do remember there was an attack on someone. Obviously, the guy was mentally ill, but he was sort of claiming that when he attacked someone, that it was in the name of Islam. And one of the guys who took him down, I don't know if he's heard about this, but he sort of said, "You ain't no Muslim, bruv," and that became a big.
I heard of the hashtag.
Yeah. That's where that came from, and so. I mean, that's sort of that got a lot of attention, and in a positive way. It wasn't sort of,
Yeah. See, for me, the issue is that oftentimes a lot of the angry Western far right screaming at Muslims gives a chance to Muslim conservatives or Muslim right wingers to sort of brush the problems underneath and pretend like nothing is wrong and not address the issues, and it's just people lashing out or complaining about Islam unnecessarily, when I think there's a bit more nuance.
So sort of needed. Like circling the wagons and sort of brushing to the side.
So when the alt-right screech at conservative Muslims or victimize even conservative Muslims, then that gives conservative, even far-right Muslims, sort of this blanket.
It gives them their ammunition. It gives them their own ammunition.
Yeah.
And so, it's almost like I think if you put a couple of these guys in the same room, like the far, the radical imams and some of the radical right, I think they might get along more than.
I don't even know why they hate each other. I mean, they do share some really crazy values. Like I grew up in Saudi Arabia. So I actually grew up under Sharia law. I mean, I grew up in a compound for foreigners, so I wasn't constantly exposed to it, but every day we did leave the compound, so I was exposed to it. You know, I've had my encounters with morality police and weird shit like that. But, you know, so I come here, I immigrate to Canada, and I'm like, yay, and now I'm starting to see this resurgence of, you know, trad life, or like women should dress modestly, and we hate the gay pride parade, it's degeneracy, and it's like,
you do see some of that too here. Yeah.
You hear it from the Western right, sort of repeating those talking points about how they're, you know, Lauren Southern just did a video about why she doesn't like pride parades, and you know, there's all these like trad life alt-righters that
okay, sorry, I sort of took that wrong, because I mean, obviously there's some of that coming from the Muslim sphere as well, but
that's obviously coming from the Muslim sphere, but what I find weird is when now people are kind of getting attracted by it on the Western right.
That's what I'm saying. But that makes sense. Like I don't know if you've come across this person online, but there's she's a Mormon Nazi, basically.
Yes, wife with a purpose.
Wife with a purpose. Like, she's doing all this. She's all like, you know, look at our beautiful white children, you know, live traditionally. Look, you know, we're missing these days of being, you know, all happy in our homogenous society. And I think the great thing the other day was she posted pictures of a Roman amphitheater and said, even our ruins look beautiful.
Yes, I saw
and people just came in and wrecked her shit, and they were posting pictures of Blockbuster. That was that last night, and I sent her a picture of a beer glass half empty. But really sort of that's that's one of the sort of pillars of the whole alt-right that sort of worries me. You know, I'm married to a German. I've got family in Europe, and you do sort of see coming from Central European countries a sort of a huge sort of clinging to that sort of traditional life sort of dialogue, which has been there, or you know, opinions, which has been there for centuries, because obviously they've got the history of that's where the clash of civilizations has occurred. But it's really scary when it sort of makes its way from Central Europe into the rest of Europe, and you know,
and is attracting young people.
Yeah, and I mean, like,
and then they hate Sharia and Islam. Why? When they want to go back to when they want to do the same things. It's weird. Like, you know,
exactly,
I see a lot of them complaining about women, you know, dressed immodestly, and I'm like, wow, it's like I haven't left Saudi at all. That's, I mean, coming back to the appropriation of fake history. I mean, a lot of these guys, it's really bad in metal scenes, especially. A lot of these kids sort of taking on sort of symbols of, you know, medieval Christianity and things like that, talking about the Crusades and I mean, that's probably the thing. One of the things that sort of worries me the most is, you know, seeing these young kids talking about, you know, going around saying Deus Vult and, you know, acting like the Crusades were a good thing. And I just recorded a podcast where I sort of talked about, okay, you want to be a Crusader, this is what Crusaders actually did before they even left Europe. You know, it's murder and it's mayhem and it's you know, you don't want to be this kind of thing. So I think that's that's something I'm really keeping an eye on. I think and you know, as someone who I've always been interested in like subcultures and things like that, like, you know, I've worn my share of dog collars and fishnets and things, but now I see all that being appropriated. In fact, I recently did an episode called Fascist Fashion, where we talked a lot about how they like are sort of appropriating, I don't know, top hats and pocket watches and these like things that are a nod to times past when things were whiter. But these are like harmless symbols, right, that they're taking as alt-right things like pocket watches.
No, they can't have that. That's not theirs. No, yeah. You know, it's a good example. There's the sort of fash wave musical sort of music genre, I guess. It's you know, there was that sort of vaporwave sort of sound that they had going on for a little while, sort of with the synths harking back to the 90s and stuff. And
but I love like old 90s synth music.
Yeah, then these alt-right edgelords come along, and then now there's a genre called fash wave, and there's all these artists.
Really?
You know, yeah, look it up. Yeah, look it up. There is fash wave. Yes, they ruin everything.
Oh.
Nazis ruin everything.
They really do. And didn't Richard Spencer say that Depeche Mode was like...
Yeah, Depeche Mode immediately issued a statement saying, no. Yeah.
They really do ruin everything. And so what do you think of this like sort of reverse political correctness that I don't know if, you know, you see that in some of the online circles that you travel in, but I certainly do, where people are afraid to call even the most blatant Holocaust deniers, Jew haters, Nazis, or white supremacists. You cannot, you know, you have to walk on eggshells around those people.
I don't know whether I do see it, but I thankfully I don't feel like I see it as much in the British sphere. I mean, I'm from Australia originally. I mean, I'm a British citizen, but at least in Australia, 90% of the time, if there's a Nazi saying Nazi shit, they'll be told they're a fucking Nazi and told to, you know, cut it out. You are saying some awful things. And, you know, if they start doing stuff like Holocaust denial, then they will be told, you know, you are beyond the pale. We are not dealing with you anymore. I was wondering how it would be when I came to Britain, because I thought it'd be a lot more polite and a lot more people are scared of saying things and calling out, you know, the excesses of, you know, the horrible racist stuff from the right. But no, I think the English are fairly good at sort of finding a point where it's not on. And
that's good, because
it's a fairly low threshold, I think. I mean, I think our sort of railing against political correctness is against fairly sort of, I won't say I'm harmless, because it's not harmless, but it's you know, we'll get really wound up about, over here people will get wound up about little things, but you know, if you say something that's blatantly racist or xenophobic, you will be told where to go. But I think the wonderful thing is, and I wasn't expecting it when I came from Australia to the UK to take up citizenship, was how mercilessly you'd have the piss taken out of you, which is I think it's pretty good. I think that's a good strain within the British psyche, that if you say something that's completely mad and hateful, you will be called on it.
That's great. I mean, that's not what I'm seeing in my I guess atheist or rational skeptic circles, but it's good to hear that the outside world is different.
I think in the popular English sphere, I mean, you know, I think one of the things that's been glorious to watch while I've been over here is the slow implosion of UKIP. And you know, they had some incredibly toxic people there, but you know, really the weapon that brought them down was abject mockery. And you know, I think your mockery is a powerful weapon.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cases. So I think
that's why your beautiful "get fucked" at the end was so good. That was a very, very liberating, very liberating experience. I think it's kind of weird, because I think, you know, in talking to people, and you know, I've had a lot of emails and a lot of DMs and people, and I think that's, you know, I wish I could have said that to him. Yeah. And so what's it been like generally? Like having an increase of 25,000 followers overnight.
Yeah.
What has that been like?
Like it's funny to say, because I don't want to talk myself up, because it's just like, you know, it's just one of those things that happens. But a lot of people have said something like, you know, it's like a bit of a floodgate opening, like, you know, I mean, obviously we're used to taking down people like UKIP over here in Britain and stuff like that through, you know, just taking the piss. But, you know, in telling one of these scary new kind of alt-right guys to, you know, to go jump, people are sort of realizing that they're just as, you know, susceptible to mockery. They're not. We don't have to use kid gloves around them. I'd like to think that, and I'd like to encourage people when they come across these guys to rip the shit out of them, because that's how you get to them. And facts, they hate facts.
They do hate facts. So if Paul Joseph Watson were to ask you out for a pint, like to just hang out, would you do it?
I really don't like him, so probably not. If he said, look, Mike, you know, obviously your call for me to get fucked has been a life-changing moment. Please, please help me understand why people might not like what I have to say. Then yeah, sure. But if he's just saying, you know, let's have a pint, Mike, well, no, he's going to get fucked. So.
Good answer.
No. I mean, you know, as it goes back to what I was saying before, I'm sure that Paul doesn't believe 90% of what he says. It's not 90. Let's say he doesn't believe 40% of what he says.
Okay.
I think a lot of it is performance.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't leave his apartment much, I hear. So you don't have to worry about that.
They do call him Prison Paul. He's in his mum's basement. So I've been really harsh on him, but maybe he deserves that.
It's been hilarious to see. So, and yeah, your podcast you were talking about. I heard your pilot episode, which I enjoyed, and there was one paragraph that really stood out to me. You said, I don't know about you, but the parallels to present day are pretty clear. It ain't the Pope telling us to wage war on Islam these days, but a million talking heads telling us how evil our Muslim brothers and sisters are. In response, the ignorant and the hateful the world over are repeating talking points, forming groups to defend themselves, to push the Muslim interloper out of their country. Today's crusaders don't wear chainmail, but hide behind screens. The holy war might not be visible, but it's starting to do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
So
and I think you're going to get a lot more of that in the future. I mean, when they searched Anders Breivik's I can't say his name. That guy's apartment. They found a lot of links to a lot of the literature from these guys that they were already starting to produce a few years ago. He described himself as he was a self-confessed Templar Knight, and he had a lot of Templar Knight gear around his apartment, and he's got pictures of him wearing medals and stuff like that. So he completely appropriated the holy war imagery. I mean, in his own way, it was a jihad for him. And I think that's the thing that I'm really trying to push for, and I hope that comes out of this is that we can sort of say, okay, you can have these hateful ideas, but history is a powerful weapon, and you're not going to be able to use this weapon, mate.
So what do you think of the idea of I got a question on Twitter for you from someone called Bicho Marafado. I'm probably butchering that, but they were asking about how rich nations have a greater access to their past and their history because money, and this disparity often distorts our vision of humanity's past. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, undeniably, I mean, I guess one of the great things, I think one of the things that sort of was good about this whole thing being here in England is that we have, our history education in schools is pretty good. It's fairly, you can mention things. You can say things like, okay, the troops at Vindolanda, and people will know that was a fort on the wall. And people have that sort of access to history. We have English Heritage and the National Trust who look after these places. We have excellent programming on the BBC with a wealth of popular historians who are very active on social media, very active elsewhere, pushing cultural. It's called cultural capital. I mean, they're pushing cultural capital, and people are really taking this up, and I think that's good. I mean, here in England, people have access to that heritage, but I can sort of see that in some countries where there isn't that sort of infrastructure involved, that sort of almost like a heritage industry, people can come along, the government can come along and start saying, I'm thinking of places like Hungary and stuff like that, where the government can sort of invoke the past and evoke the continual wars against the East as kind of a rallying call for all sorts of horrible policies regarding immigration. So I completely agree. It's a nation needs to know where it comes from, but at the same time, we need the historiographical tools for everyone to be able to access that history.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of what these alt-right types say is based on this skewed understanding of world history, right? When poor countries haven't had the same access to their history or the resources to spend on developing this cultural capital. So that's why they always say that, Western contributions to the world have been the greatest. And, when we really don't know a lot about for me, my history, I guess my background is Pakistani, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia. So, a lot of my family's history is lost because of the partition. So,
So,
the partition of India. So we don't really have a lot of history. I can't trace my, my ancestors and my lineage, and I can't go to Ancestry.com and just, plug my name in because we, somewhere along the line dropped our last names for some reason. And so, we really don't have access to our histories, our family trees, or anything.
No. So, look, I can see and I understand. And I think that's part of the thing going forward. And, I mean, obviously, as I've said, I was a teacher, and I'm sort of always be in that space doing some form of education. But we need, I think one of the things I'd like to do is sort of give people, no matter where they are, some sort of tools to sort of, I think that's kind of like the mission I'd sort of given myself, give people the tools to sort of say, I don't know anything about where I come from. Where can I find out stuff that's, not likely to be biased or skewed in some way. Someone's not trying to sell me some shit with this, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really going to be helpful.
That's what I'd hope would come out from all of this hullabaloo.
Yeah, good stuff.
This whole idea of fake history is something that's in the last 5 years it's exponentially growing. And I think that people are starting to realize that, there's money to be made from it. There's an organization here called the Knights Templar International, which is, basically feeding off the fear and xenophobia of older men. It's kind of like the Masons for racists, and you pay 69 quid a year and you get to hang out with this kind of stuff. But, that kind of stuff's always been around to an extent. It's the well-funded hate groups that are pushing this stuff to kids and to young people using YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, which is, as a historian, is absolutely terrifying. And I think that
there's so much money in it too.
There's so much money in it. There's so much money to be made. And I think historians, this is we've always been a part of the culture wars, but I think that this is now one huge front that's about to open up. And I think that we already have a history that's sort of shattered and sort of broken by all sorts of events and, human foibles. But I think it's time. I'd really like to think that historians who are already, there's quite a few who are already doing this, but I think that if every historian can sort of think about this as something that they need to sort of do as part of their work is to sort of, A, safeguard what we do know beyond doubt, and B, make it accessible for people.
I think that's a great call to action. Yeah.
We need to acknowledge the fact that no man is an island, that every country in every part of the world has had been influenced by the other, and make that fact accessible to everybody. That's what really needs to happen now, I think. Otherwise, obviously it's sort of foolish to think that, we can stop conflicts and all that kind of stuff, because that's just human nature. But if historians can do their bit to sort of make people recognize that we're not all that different. That sounds quite hippie, some hippie bullshit, but we're not all that different. There's there was a British MP called Jo Cox who was killed by a far-right activist in last year. And her thing was, we've got more in common than what separates us. And, still when she's remembered, that's the sort of hashtag, more in common. And I think that, that is basically a good credo for historians. Yeah.
Yeah, and even in fictional TV shows, do you see them objecting to things that they think aren't realistic, people calling for more diversity in Game of Thrones?
You just had a chat today with a journalist about Game of Thrones, and I haven't sort of seen anything about Game of Thrones in particular with the right wing losing their marbles over this kind of stuff. But I definitely see that. Doctor Who definitely. Doctor Who has had a lot of people completely losing their shit with the new Doctor just being the latest. But you do sort of see that in. There was that what was it? A couple of years ago, that really crazy guy, Fox Day, trying to come up with a list of anti-social justice warrior texts for the Hugos, and got people to vote for them, and they failed spectacularly. But
the guy who admires Anders Breivik.
In sci-fi and fantasy, there is definitely a core of people who are looking for less diversity in their fantasy. I mean, they've obviously got no problem with fire-breathing dragons and and a gigantic wall of ice and zombie ice warriors walking across the entire planet and killing everybody. But, a couple of black people completely fries their brains.
Yeah, it's so strange.
Yeah, I think that there is a good pushback against that. I'm reasonably confident about the world of literature in that there are a lot of new voices, and particularly people of colour, people of different faiths, gay and lesbian and transgender authors who are doing their thing and sort of pushing back. And self-publishing and all these kind of things gives people such a great platform to make their voices heard. So, yeah. I just wish it was that way in history.
Yeah. Well,
and, there is to signal boost those guys that are doing it.
Yeah. And you, you're doing something great. Your call to action is great. And I really hope that it picks up more and more, and that you do kind of correct people when they're using history to score cheap political points.
Well, I think the encouraging thing is that there are people not just on the net, but there are people out there in the traditional media who are sort of hearing this and sort of. I haven't got any firm plans or anything, but I've had some conversations with people about sort of talking about and addressing this kind of thing. So that's comforting in of itself, that if we can get a whole bunch of more historians out there correcting the record, then that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, Mike, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I'll definitely, watch your Twitter, and thank you so much again for taking the time to be on here. And where can I point people to check out your podcast and your Twitter?
Okay. Just keep an eye on Twitter, which is at Mike Stuchbery. It's Mike Stuchbery _ and that's where I will be putting up new information about the podcast when it arrives, which will be a fact-checking or sort of a historical mythbusters with less explosions and more primary sources, basically. So yeah, keep an eye on Twitter, and that'll be the thing.
Excellent. And can you help me close with a nice get fucked?
Okay. P.S. Get fucked. That was my interior monologue at the time. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you.
No worries.
All
okay.
Right, well,
cheers.
Pleasure chatting.
Pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/nicemangoes. No E in mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at nicemangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no E in mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too. A special thanks to Dylan Beck for theme music, sound, and production help.